This week, I'm joined by Matt Alderman to discuss the enterprise security news, including a privilege escalation vulnerability in a security product, an Untangle survey that finds SMBs are still struggling with IT security. Tufin delivers advanced visibility and topology modeling for Cisco ACI Migration, and how the OS that powers smartphones today started from a failure. In our second segment, we're going to air a lot more pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat, Jason Brevnik of NSS Labs, and Mehul Revankar of SaltStack. In the final segment, you get two more pre-recorded interviews, Carolyn Crandall of Ativo Networks and Krupa Srivatsan of Infoblox. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Cloud-first development helps your business move fast, but misconfigurations and blind spots are part of the deal. App and dev teams get the flexibility, while security teams are left with the stress of managing new risk using legacy workflows. ExtraHop RevealX provides cloud-native network detection and response, backed by cloud-scale machine learning that helps you spot threats and unify processes across hybrid environments. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. That's extrahop.com/securityweekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At Tufin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about Tufin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/Tufin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Welcome, everyone, to episode 152 of Enterprise Security Weekly for September 4th, 2019. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome back to a after-holiday weekend.
Yes. We've got exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We're partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you get 1 CPE credit per webcast. We've got ones coming up with Stephen Smith and Jeff Brosher of Logarithm, or Tom Stitt of ExtraHop. You can go to securityweekly.com/webcasts. You'll also get credits if you watch the ones in our archive, which can be accessed by going to securityweekly.com/on-demand. We will also be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. If you are attending and would like to sponsor an interview, please submit your conference request form at securityweekly.com/booking. EC Council's offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the two-day conference. Use the discount code HH19SW when you register, or go to securityweekly.com/hackerhalted. And now for the enterprise news. There wasn't much in product announcements, so I tried to make these enterprise focused. We're also not recording Paul Security Weekly this week due to the DerbyCon, the final DerbyCon. It's very sad. DerbyCon will be held this week. I unfortunately will not be attending. But Sam and Mark are, so it's good. We will have presence there and be recording interviews. The first article, Matt, is protecting your road warriors from cyber hazards. Now, this is a Morphosec commercial. We did an interview with them, and I really liked them and their technology. However, I thought it afforded us the luxury to talk about, well, First, let's talk about some of the statistics, which I think are interesting. They say it's estimated 70% of the global workforce works remotely at least once a week, and a little more than half, at least half of the week. And by 2023, it's expected to hit 1.88 billion. It means technology, Matt, and the way businesses operate today, more people are going to be working remotely. It's not just going to be people who are traveling, but working remotely is commonplace today, essentially.
Yeah, it's been commonplace for me since 2009, I think.
Yeah, right.
I haven't been in a base office since 2009. I work out of my home, got the little studio here.
Right.
Once a month, I come into studio, maybe go to an event. But for me, this is commonplace. And I think what you're seeing is when you think about the cost of buildings and housing people,
Yeah.
if you can work effectively remotely, you can bring down your costs as a business by not having these big corporate headquarters and buildings and the cost structure associated with that. Technology's made it easier. We have a lot of services available to us in the cloud and through different SaaS providers, for example. So working remotely is a piece of cake. Like I said, I've been doing it since 2009.
That heavyweight VPN thing is a thing of the past. Thank God. That was a nightmare to install, manage, configure, and maintain. I certainly have some scars in my career from managing VPNs and user. And to the user's credit, it wasn't easy at all. It was horrible end user experience, right?
Yeah, it was horrible. Look, this is why we always talk about the new perimeter. It's us. It's us and what we're connecting to wherever we are because we're remote. We're not sitting in a corporate environment often behind a big firewall. We are on the road, right? And this talks about some of the hazards of connecting, to the public Wi-Fi in the coffee shop and et cetera, et cetera. Those are all valid concerns. But it's way easier to work this way now than it ever has been. And so the perimeter shift is happening to these remote workers who are out in a coffee shop. And those security protections need to move with the end user, with the devices that they're using, with the applications that they're interfacing with, not at the firewall anymore.
And I think, and this is a question for John and Trusted Sec and the folks that we are close to and work with today that do assessments of any kind. My question is how do you test that? And I'm curious to see if they have models where, it's one thing to phish an organization and you get on a workstation that's connected to the Active Directory domain and it's inside the organization. But as this article points out, a lot of people work remotely. So when doing your phishing campaigns, sure you could figure it out, probably be a little bit of work to say, well, this person works from home once a week. When we infect their system, do we wait till they bring it in to the corporate network? Or what can happen? What are the steps an attacker would take? What are the risks and exposures, and how do the attackers get to them when they're working remotely? I think it's really about protecting your identity and those credentials, right, to the app user data model. But how do we test that? I'm curious to see if there are scenarios where you'd like to simulate it, right? You don't want to say, well, our remote employees get malware once in a while, and you don't want to wait till the incident happens. How do we simulate? What steps do an attacker have to take, and what's the impact to the organization when a remote user is compromised using cloud services, SaaS services, largely, right, in place of VPNs to do that?
Yeah, a really easy test scenario would be go to the nearest Starbucks to the corporation that you're trying to get into, and then see if you can hijack the users at the coffee shop because they're taking their machine down there and they might be doing some work while they have coffee. That would be a really interesting test scenario because then they're close by to whoever you're pen testing.
Right. And I'm sure that's happening today. I'm curious to see what the steps are, what the results are, and what the remediation steps are. We did an interview with Morphosec, and I really liked their technology. And I think you have to put some type of agent on these remote systems to offer some level of protection, right? Because now your threat vectors are pretty wide open when the user is not on your network, not necessarily using all of your software. How do you protect them? And there are schemes for that. Google had one that Duo was using, right, where they basically said, you can use whatever you want to access this application, but if we see certain conditions, we're going to make you go through more steps to authenticate or not,
Yep.
right? And those are good things. So I mean, there is stuff out there. I'd be curious to hear from our audience and our pen tester friends how we're testing for and trying to remediate this situation, which is different. I mean, when you hear pen testers talk, right, they're like, well, we got in on something on the internal network and escalated from there. What happens when it's outside the internal network?
Yep. And this story is related to the other one you have around vulnerability remediation, fight for the users.
Yes.
Now, I was hoping this article was going to go down a slightly different path.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it was kind of cool, the Tron, things and stuff, but...
Yeah, this focused more on the challenges with the end user. What I was hoping this article was going to do is point out just the issues with vulnerability detection, not the remediation side. It talks about it a little bit. I wanted them to get a little more bold in going after some of these solutions, say, look, it's not just detection, remediation for the users is a big part of this. This is, again, where your agent technologies come in, because it talks about unpatched software, third-party operating system. It talks about a lot of these different things where we've seen some really good solutions evolve, but then you have traditional solutions that really haven't evolved to address the remediation side of this. And that's where I was hoping the article would go.
That's true. I mean, in this scenario, to remediate on the user side, you'd have something like the AutoMox agent, right, on everyone's workstations that connect. How do you enforce that too, right? If the machines aren't yours, that can be difficult. If you're issuing the machines, say, look, your corporate laptop that you're accessing your work on has the AutoMox agent, right? I mean, that's a huge step one, because you're doing detection and remediation all in a single platform.
Exactly right. And that's where a lot of vulnerabilities are going to come in, these unpatched devices that are out there. And so if I had a way to keep the OS and all the third-party software patched, think about the attack surface that gets minimized just by having those systems up to date. And then obviously there's stuff like, he talks a lot about man-in-the-middle attacks and Wi-Fi and some other things. There's ways to mitigate that. To me, that's not as, I don't know if that's as big a concern for me and for others. Maybe it is. I mean, it ties into the last article a little bit. I just think the ability to keep machines up to date, especially of remote workers like we talked about in the last article, is difficult. And the traditional solutions don't scale well to that. And new solutions like AutoMox and others make this a whole heck of a lot easier to address some of these remediation issues for end users.
Right. Yeah, then it comes into your, it's not so much CASBs. Now I can't think of the vendors, but, they create your cloud inside the cloud. And everything, and you hate this, I know. Everything goes through your instance of the cloud to gain access to your applications that live on other people's servers, right? So you're funneling all of that through your cloud. But those systems do have those things like we used to see in network access control, right? Like if your browser's out of date or your operating system's out of date, you can't connect. You got to go update that first. And that's okay. I think also the article, rightfully so, touches on what we can do from the server and application side, right? Like making sure we've got valid certificates on all of your systems today, which is more challenging than it sounds, because there's a lot more checks that they can put into the SSL today. In fact, I noticed that too. One of the certs I created didn't really work all that well in Firefox because it does some different kind of checking, and I need to research that. I wasn't sure what that was coming from. So... and also using insecure protocols, right, in services. We got to make sure that there's no clear text FTP or, telnet in the user's workflow, because like we established before, they're going to be at a coffee shop and, you can come down to the least secure bit, which is I use FTP to get this file from point A to point B, right?
Or just SSL 1.1.1.2, et cetera.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So I think there are things in what the author was pointing out. We have to do our diligence on the services and server side and application side of things, as well as giving the user the means to, I just like keeping all their software up to date. It's huge, right?
Yep. And let's make sure you're using an agent that doesn't have a privilege escalation bug in it.
Yeah, like who's watching I guess we do a lot of self-policing, right? My unofficial confirmation that, right? But security companies do get together behind the scenes and say, can you test my stuff, right? I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this too. And we don't like to be forthcoming about who's testing what and how and when, but working for security vendors, I'm like, yeah, this is happening, and it's a smaller community too. So, when you create your product company, you go to your friends that are doing assessment and testing, and are like, hey, you gotta come test my stuff, right? And I think also security companies have a heightened awareness when there's a vulnerability in their own software, right? Because we're security companies, we want to make sure that we're secure. But that also means that none of us are immune, right? We're not going to pick on Check Point for having a vulnerability because we all have glass houses, right? And providing secure software to your end users is very challenging. And I think it's all about how you handle it. There's a great article from a company. It was a customer of a company called MuleSoft and how they handled a vulnerability in their API gateway. Their customers were like, this was fantastic. They did 2 calls with every customer. One with their DevOps team to explain this is the problem, and another one to say, did you really fix it? And if you didn't, here's some other mitigation steps, right? And so that level of diligence was applauded by their customers and should be used as a model. But if flaws exist in all software, security's not exempt from that, right? And so how do we test and make sure? I feel like we do a lot of testing of our productivity software, maybe not so much our security software. That depends on where you are. I'm sure the governments do a lot more testing, obviously, than some corporations, but it should be part of your testing suite, right? You got to test your security products, not just to make sure that they work, which is what we talk about with breach and attack simulation all the time in the enterprise, but do they actually have vulnerabilities? Now, that doesn't mean all of us need to be bug hunters, but there needs to be some due diligence in this process.
Yeah. What I like about this one, they go into a really great explanation of what was happening. But look, this was disclosed to Check Point on August 1st. They had it patched by August 27th. So it took them 26 days to get the fix out, right? That's
not horrible. That's good.
No, that's not horrible.
Yeah.
It's within 30 days,
Sure.
right? They had to make changes and roll out a patch and test and et cetera. So look, Check Point responded very quickly to this to make sure that a patch was out there. We've seen other flaws that have taken months to patch, right? And then what's the workaround or the mitigating, compensating control or whatever. So, I mean, in the security space, obviously Check Point knows that, look, flaws happen.
Yeah,
respond to them quickly.
Their research team does a fantastic job of disclosing vulnerabilities. Their write-ups are awesome. So, I mean, clearly a talented team at Check Point. So,
yeah. So turn it around quickly.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to, Matt, is how we talk about this in Business Security Weekly, right? It's how you handle the situation, basically.
Yep. Exactly right. When you push off the researchers and you poo-poo the flaw and then you take months to fix it, guess what you're losing? You're losing a lot of trust with the community at that point.
Exactly. Let's see. An Untangle survey finds that SMBs still struggle with IT security, and this is, I don't think anything shocking, right? We kind of know this. Limited resources.
No. Yeah, I mean, not shocking. Again, I always look at the number of respondents. It's 300, kind of low.
Yep.
But I think we all instinctively know that SMBs have tighter constraints on resources, both from a people and from a budgeting perspective, which makes it harder to address IT security. I think, Untangle is one vendor. I think we did RSA conference. I think we did a sponsored interview with them.
Yeah.
And kind of they're building holistic solutions to address multiple problems in the SMB. You have others that I think have done really good jobs of offering a broader suite of capabilities to the SMB market to make it a little easier because they don't have the money to go out and buy every single best in breed point solution integrated all together.
Maintain it.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't have it.
Yeah, Kaseya has a sponsor that has some great solutions for that. We've done webcasts and interviews with them.
Right. So you're going to see a lot more, I think, of IT management companies adding security capabilities as part of their IT management suite that are going to be offered to the SMB, either through an MSP or an MSSP or directly, either way. But, this is where there's a lot of need still, required because, again, not a lot of resources. They definitely need the help.
It's interesting when we think about in the United States, state and local governments and how they're being attacked with ransomware attacks. They're not necessarily a small business. They have a lot of customers, right? Conceivably, everyone that lives in the town is a customer in some respect. I mean, you pay taxes. I guess in essence, that makes you a customer. They've also got a lot of employees, maybe above and beyond what an SMB, typical SMB might have. But the commonality is the short on resources for IT, right? The constrained budgets. We almost need a term to say, constrained budgets, right? A town has to do, in a city or a state, has to do a lot within the budget to provide services. Security in IT, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, tends to lag behind. And certainly functionality comes before a lot of that security. It'd be interesting to create models where they could have centralized resources, right? We talked about that in a previous show. Like what if cities and towns could use state resources, right? And state resources have federal resources to help them with IT and security. We desperately need that, I think, in this country. In the enterprise, it's a little different, right? Because there's a profit incentive, and it's just a different type of environment. And you have typically intellectual property to protect. Now, you do in the small towns, but it's not necessarily theirs, right? Like it's our information that they're protecting. So I think it's in our best interest to help, support a model that will help small businesses, especially cities and towns, with this problem.
Yeah, we've seen some good examples in the education space. Take Ocean, for example.
I was just going to say, Ocean's a prime example, right? We need the Ocean, the consortiums of the world to step up. And Ocean does service local cities, the major ones, not necessarily the smaller ones, and some of the educational departments, right?
Right, exactly. And it's that kind of model where you can have some shared resources to provide certain capabilities that the individual municipalities don't need to take on,
right,
which would hopefully allow them to get better security without necessarily all the costs involved in having their own staffs and doing it themselves.
Like backups are one. It was one the article pointed out. Backups aren't like this magic utopia where you're immune to ransomware. They have to be constructed in a certain way to minimize that risk. Of course, there's always some risk that the backups could be taken over or deleted, and then ransomware runs. I think it's a smaller instances where that happens, but if they could provide, and I think Ocean did similar things like this, right? Would take a common service like that and provide it centrally. So it's the same for everyone. It's that higher level of security and less maintenance and management on the individual contributors, but provides a much better level of security and IT, quite frankly, than a lot of the cities and towns can do on their own. I mean, this is a similar model we use in universities, right? When you have a university with multiple departments, we started doing that when I worked in the university space, right? It was proven that those models were providing better security, right? Many universities and colleges did studies. I think Marcus Random told me about one years ago, and they just took the incidents and they said, look, here's the incidents, security incidents that happen in departments where we don't manage any of their infrastructure. And here's the incidents that happen when we do. And look, it's much less when we manage it, right? Like very simple stats like that are very telling.
Yep. True. And I mean, backups is one way. This article goes into some of the other pitfalls, though, of ransomware attacks, which, look, we've seen a number of them at the municipal side, smaller cities. SMBs are definitely an issue, have this concern as well. Backups is one, but it talks about, your incident response plan and being prepared for ransomware, being prepared to decide whether you're going to pay or not pay. I had a very interesting conversation in the Uber ride from the studio last week of somebody that was talking about, these insurance payouts. And we're starting to see insurance covering the cost of some of these ransomware attacks because they have a cyber insurance policy. Well, let's think about what that's going to do to cyber insurance going forward, because now that insurance companies are starting to pay these ransoms out, what are the cyber insurers going to do when it comes to proving that you have security controls in place to get the cyber policy in the first place, and what that's going to do to premiums? I think all SMBs and municipalities and others that are looking at cyber insurance really need to understand what some of these impacts might be and have a plan to know, does your policy cover this payout? Or are you just going to pay it out and move forward or not? Because these are big decisions that have to be made in the middle of an attack.
Right. Exactly. On the IoT security front, Microsoft Azure IoT, which I believe is the same thing as Azure Sphere that we talked about or it sounds very similar, right? It's basically a framework that allows IoT manufacturers to, and they say in here, accelerate, leverage their investments in IoT implementations, reduces complexity. So automation of device registration, onboarding, provisioning, and management of credentials of IoT credentials for IoT devices that connect to Azure IoT Hub. Those are basically the major issues that we have with IoT today, right? Is that management and managing the credentials on those systems. And here's Microsoft with a great framework for you to adopt to do that. We need to get the manufacturers all on board in doing this, and there has to be some benefit to them. I think this is the similar outsourcing model that we're talking about. Rather than build it in-house, you outsource this model to Microsoft to put a ton of R&D time into building this platform.
Yeah, and then what you have is vendors building off of that framework to enhance their products to manage aspects of this. So I think this article is related to what Device Authority is doing with their new Keyscaler software release to actually support that new Microsoft IoT framework so that they can consolidate all of those capabilities together in a single platform.
Yep. Definitely something to look into.
Yep.
So product announcements, Beyond Trust expands the privilege access management with enhanced SaaS solutions. Nothing earth-shattering there.
No, just it's going to continue to happen, right? Everybody realizes that privilege access in the cloud, vaults that are available in the cloud. We've been talking about this internally for our application. Where are we going to put all of our keys and credentials and stuff?
Right.
So you're going to see all the privilege access, and I think identity and access folks continue to add cloud components into their solutions to support the cloud and all these hybridized environments. So nothing earth-shattering there.
What was the Cisco ACI? That's one I didn't look up. What is that?
Yeah, I didn't look up Cisco ACI either. It must be one of their new routing, switch, firewall platforms. And it looks like people are starting to migrate over to that platform. So Tufin added support to assist people in that migration because, again, Tufin is centrally managing a lot of that. ACI is probably, I think it's their firewall platform, actually.
It says SDN, application-centric infrastructure. It's part of Cisco's software-defined networking.
Got it. Yep.
Policy-driven solution that integrates software and hardware.
Yeah, because everything is going to be defined as code.
Yeah.
Everything. Like your networking layer, your compute layer, your storage layer, your orchestrator layer, your container layer, everything is going to be defined as code, right? And so you're going to have to support these software-defined components as you think about, as you continue to migrate to them. So Tufin's adding support for Cisco-specific software-defined components, but there will be more. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Let's see. The other article, I thought this was just a cool article. I don't know if it really relates to enterprise security, but a lot of us use Linux and Unix today. Some of us don't know how much we actually use Linux and Unix, but likely if you're deploying containers anywhere, you're using Linux under the covers somewhere, even if you don't, know you're using it, you are. So it was a really, really in-depth article about the last 50 years and how Unix and Linux came to be. So it was a kind of cool look.
Well, I remember this in school, the story of Unix, right? Multics, which was the original kind of basis for what Unix is today, was kind of a failure. And it was a multiplex kind of system. And the joke was with Unix, it was a unique, right? Because it lost the multi part of it. So, and it kind of got its naming from the Unix perspective. So interesting history here that you take something like Multics, which failed as an operating system, streamlined it down, turned it into an operating system that we use a lot today. Think about what's powering the cloud, what's powering roughly half, if not more than half of all the mobile phones with Android in the world, all came through this initial failure / reinvention of the operating system.
Yep. And it's interesting how open source played a huge role, right? I mean, Unix was in the beginning not commercial, right? They used to, whoever wanted a copy, you could write them and they would snail mail you the media to install it, right?
Yeah, well, and then there were a ton of variations off of Unix.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, IBM had AIX, HP had HPUX, you had Solaris as a version, right? So then you had BSD variants. So Unix expanded into a lot of different variants, a lot different. If you think about it today, I mean, a lot of it's kind of the old Red Hat kind of base now. There's still variations, but you don't see what I remember growing up coming through college with all these commercial variants of Unix. A lot of that's gone away for the open source kind of Red Hat based Linux operating systems and got away from custom hardware and their custom Unix kernels.
Right. For sure. I think that rounds out the news for this week. I'm excited to be airing 4 more in the next 2 segments, 4 more interviews that we did at Black Hat. So hopefully you're enjoying those. So stay tuned for those, and thanks for listening and watching.